Aboriginal groups want indigenous leaders to be recognized as equal to the Queen. Australia could soon have a new sovereign or sovereigns equal to the Queen if indigenous leaders are successful in designing a treaty. Victorian Greens MP Lydia Thorpe is among those calling for a treaty between the Australian government and Aboriginal representatives on equal terms. The issue was raised with Prince Charles by Yolngu clan leaders during his visit to the Northern Territory in April in the form of a special letter stick. Treaty is between two sovereigns and to be asking the government to at least acknowledge that Aboriginal people maintain their sovereignty. I don't think that's too much to ask, Thorpe said. While a treaty bill passed Victoria's lower house in June, Thorpe has said she wants Aboriginal land ownership recognized in the legislation by the inclusion of the word sovereignty, and the use of sovereign clans instead of Aboriginal Victorians. The 1969 Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties defines a treaty as an international agreement concluded between two states. An Aboriginal treaty, therefore, would require recognition of Aboriginal nations and sovereigns, something which has never been done by the Australian government. Leaders of Arnhem Land's Yolngu clans declared sovereignty over their own lands during a meeting with Prince Charles earlier this year. "This here is Yolngu land. We are sovereign people and we live by Yolngu law," member for Nhulunbuy Mark Goayala told Prince Charles. "We have many difficulties with the Australian governments because they do not recognize our sovereignty. Australia is the only Commonwealth country without a treaty with its indigenous people. A treaty is a formal agreement between two states. If Aboriginal sovereignty is recognized in a treaty, Aboriginal nations could have heads of state equal to the Queen. There have been various treaty proposals at federal and state level. They could result in one treaty or a series of treaties. Negotiated treaties could result in official apologies and recognitions of past wrongs, acknowledgement of land ownership and reconciliation." Mr. Goayala said the issue was vital for the survival of the oldest living culture in the world, and presented Prince Charles with the letter stick. "I request, on behalf of the people standing before you in the Yolngu nations, that you intervene on our behalf and take a strong position to acknowledge our sovereignty and promote a pathway to treaty," he said. Prince Charles accepted the letter stick, which included symbols of the Australian Parliament and states and territories, and their indigenous equivalents. Associate Professor Dominic O'Sullivan from Charles Sturt University said Indigenous Australians have had very little political voice since becoming a minority. The concept of terra nullius, nobody's land, was used to justify the British claim to sovereignty, Mr. O'Sullivan told Al Jazeera. Britain couldn't identify an organized political or social order among the indigenous population, and under international law, these were required for a people to hold sovereignty. Mr. O'Sullivan said there was an argument it was not in the interests of the colony's first governor, Arthur Phillip, to make those identifications. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders met at Uluru in May last year to call for a treaty process and an indigenous representative body enshrined in the Constitution. A copy of the resulting Uluru Statement from the Heart was then presented to Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, but the proposal for an indigenous advisory body was rejected by the government in October. Since the passing of the Victorian legislation, the Queensland government has also examined treaty talks, and there have been similar moves in Western Australia. The Northern Territory government signed a Memorandum of Understanding in June to outline a future treaty. In South Australia, however, Premier Stephen Marshall scrapped a treaty negotiation process on the same day.